stream has started. And now I have to see who accepts the stream. Okay, Twitch has accepted the stream. YouTube has accepted the stream. And Facebook has accepted the stream. Now I'm going to send you the link.
Right.
Okay, getting the link. And now I'm going to send you the link.
Mm-hmm.
And the link has been sent. So it should be on your phone and your text message.
There it is. Very good.
Very good.
Okay, so just 1 second. Okay, so we're ready to go.
Okay.
So
hit the start button on your timer.
Yep.
And you can start the show.
Very good. Okay. Welcome to Talking Peace with the Western New York Peace Center, being recorded here at Think Twice Radio in the home of the future, also the home of our friend and producer, Richard Wicca. Thank you, Richard. And we thank our friends at WBNY, Buffalo's original alternative radio station out of Buff State University. We thank our friends at Buff State and WBNY. And when I think of thankfulness, I think of our Indigenous friends and our friends who've had so much persecution and hardship, and yet one strain that runs through it is that people have that thankfulness in spite of whatever kind of hardship or oppression people have had. That certainly our Haudenosaunee friends whose unceded land we are on here in Western New York, they still start every gathering with a Ganonyo that recognizes Mother Earth and all of the wonderful plants and creatures and beauty in this world, all of the stars and all of the creation and the creator and the love that animates it all. And then when they say that, then they say Nyahweh, and the people say Nyo, so Nyahweh. Say Nyo.
Yeah, so.
Thank you. Well, I'm very grateful and excited, speaking of grateful, to have two wonderful people, just wonderful human beings that have worked so hard in their overlapping ways for the good of people on this planet. And we're going to be talking about one particular area of the planet and how things are all interrelated about that. And that is about Yemen. So our subject today is Yemen being bombed for following its principles. And we're thrilled to have, first I'll go as the Haudenosaunee does, around they go counterclockwise. So I'll say Dr. Aisha Jumaan is here, who is a health consultant. She is also the director of the Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation, and just a wonderful friend and Shira. So welcome, Aisha.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much for being here. And then, of course, I will have to say, both of you friends of the show, but especially we've had you on quite a couple of times. We've been blessed to have you on a couple of times fairly recently. Craig Mokhiber, who spent over 30 years as a senior human rights lawyer at the UN, and who quit over the heinous missteps and failings over what's happening in Palestine, who is again, just been a real, well, he's gotten the Western New York Peace Center's Stellar Media Award for all of the stellar media that he is sharing and all the teaching that he's doing. So, Craig Mokhiber. Hi, Craig. Thank you for coming. You're on mute. Somehow you got on mute in the shifting of things.
I thought we were doing lip reading today, but if you want to use audio, we'll use audio. Yeah. I was just saying thank you, Victory. Always nice to be with you, and saying what an honor it is to be with Dr. Jumaan as well. So nice to see you both.
Well, I'm so glad and grateful that we're doing this show, and I'm only sorry, although it makes it very, very timely, but that today this is being pre-taped on Wednesday, April 16th, and today there's been a lot of bombings in Yemen, so we'll be talking about that. But before we do, if we could just go around about the values that we think of when we think about the issues of Yemen and why they're being bombed, what they've been doing, why they've been doing, what are the values that come to mind when we think about that? What are the values involved? So we'll just keep going around in that circle. So, Dr. Aisha.
Yeah, for me, there are one and principle. Those are the values that come to mind, especially as we see what's happening in Gaza and how most of the world had cowered and decided not to speak up and not to go for, support justice and the lack of compassion and giving up their principles, especially Western countries in the US is on top of that.
So thank you, Aisha. And Craig?
Yeah, I agree with Aisha. I think she hit the nail on the head. I've spent the last 40 years in the international human rights movement, and for me, this is just a question of human rights, the idea that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, that those rights have to be protected by the rule of law, that all peoples and all countries have an obligation to defend those human rights when they're under attack anywhere, here at home or in Palestine, and that indeed what the Yemenis have been doing is stepping up to protect the human rights of the Palestinian people who are suffering a genocide, and for that they're being attacked by powerful Western countries. So I think this is a perfect example of why human rights are important, why their protection under the rule of law is important, and why solidarity between all of us to take the side of the victim, as Camus said, is especially important.
Thank you so much. Yes, exactly. So taking the side of the victim is important. That is what we need to do, and that is what we must do. I want to say, it's really just a paraphrasing in a way of the values that you just gave, that I think of truth and love. So the truth of the matter, what is actually happening? What is happening in Gaza, in Palestine, and of course in the occupied West Bank. Those things are being ignored, glossed over, misrepresented, overlooked. Just it's not being recognized in a lot of the media reporting. And in fact, of course, so many reporters have been killed. As we know, more reporters have been killed in Palestine than anywhere else ever. So I think that's very significant. So the truth of the matter of what's going on and the truth of the international law, which is what we'll be talking about, and we're so glad that you're here to explain that, Greg. And then, of course, the love, that we're all part, we're the one human family. We're one creation here. And so, I love it when Dr. West has said, we don't love, there's a Jewish baby or a Palestinian baby or a Sudanese baby or an Inuit baby, they're all our children, and we all have equal value. We all have that life force, and we're all connected. Like, if you cut off one finger, is the hand affected? Yes. So the people who are being, slaughtered, there are people being slaughtered. And then there's those of us who either don't know what to do, or don't care, or even people justifying it. So the truth and love, as you say, that's love being justice being what love looks like in public. That's another thing that Dr. Reston said. And you said the compassion, that's love, loving and caring and being compassionate towards each other. And lastly, the international law is so important, the justice issues that are being ignored by so many. So anyway, so thank you for that. And that really sets the framework under which we're going to look at this. And I want to say, so we have you as such an expert on international law, and also Dr. Jumaan with your expertise on Yemen and also on health aspects. So what is going on? So let's just start with what happened today. So maybe again, we'll go in that circle.
So basically, when Yemen decided to intervene to stop the genocide in Gaza in actually November of 2023, unfortunately, the U.S. response to that was to start bombing Yemen. And Yemen's position was, we're not going to allow any Israeli-linked ships to pass through the Red Sea until there's a ceasefire. And they were only targeting Israeli ships, not allowing them to go through the Red Sea. And that's when the U.S. formed, an alliance and started bombing Yemen under the Biden administration from January 2024 until January 2025. So the Biden administration, to the last day in office, was bombing Yemen. And then when the ceasefire did occur early on this year, they stopped attacking ships. They not just attacking ships, they said any ship now can pass through the Red Sea. So during the ceasefire, everything stopped. However, as we know, the Israeli government did not abide by the ceasefire and started attacking the people of Gaza again, and also preventing food and water and anything that they need for their survival. So the Yemenis said again, you have 4 days to allow food in. Otherwise, no Israeli ships are going to go through. So the Trump administration did exactly what the Biden administration was doing and started bombing Yemen. But the bombing now is more intense. It's 7 times the rate of the Biden administration, and the number of civilian casualties is 4 times those of the Biden administration. And so it's quite unfortunate that is the response the U.S. is taking. So today, there were over 14 air raids on Yemen by the U.S. government. And again, they are bombing a lot of civilian infrastructure. For example, they bombed water facilities or water systems in a country that's suffering from the largest cholera outbreak that exists today. They're bombing electrical generators. They're bombing, anything that does damage to the population and to the infrastructure in Yemen. And the easiest thing they could have done was to actually pressure the Israelis to agree to the ceasefire that the U.S. has led. It's very hard for me to understand why they think that, in the first 3 weeks of bombing under this administration, they spent $1 billion bombing Yemen. That money could have been used for Medicaid, for example, that they are slashing, right? But instead, they are willing to kill and inflict more suffering on another population in the Middle East rather than abide by the ceasefire that they brokered.
Craig?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent summary. And when you think about what that means, it's really quite shocking. And it's not a story that you will get from the government of the United States, and it's not a story that you will get from the commercial media corporations in this country that parrot the government line, so that so many people in this country are simply not aware of the atrocities being perpetrated by their own government. I mean, think of it. You've got, as Aisha said, you have a genocide being perpetrated in Palestine by the Israeli regime with the full support of the US government and other Western governments. That's number one. You have international law, including recent rulings of the International Court of Justice, that say every country is legally obliged to cut off all of the supplies that are going to the illegal occupation of the Palestinian territories and to the genocide that's being perpetrated in Palestine as well, and that they all have a legal obligation to make sure that others are not supporting these crimes that are being perpetrated there, including through two, landmark decisions and opinions by the International Court of Justice over the course of the last year and a half. So that's what's happening. And so, what does the U.S. do? They initiate this massive bombing campaign to attack Yemen so that Yemen will stop trying to interfere with Israel's ability to perpetrate the genocide. This is an act of complicity in international law. The U.S. is using its force to try to ensure that Israel has the space to continue the genocide. And remember, this is the poorest country in the region. It's a country that the U.S. has been bombing for over 2 decades now, as Aisha hinted. As they're doing it, they're violating international law. They're slaughtering civilians in the process, now in the hundreds. They're exacerbating conditions that already existed on the ground, conditions of famine, a medical crisis, internal displacement. And at the same time, they're putting U.S. soldiers at risk. They're risking a broader regional war, which many suspect that this is a part of an attempt to provoke a broader regional war. They're spending, as Aisha said, billions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer money, billions with a B, in order to bomb this poor country simply because that country was standing up to oppose the genocide that's happening in Palestine, and they're lying about their own people about what's happening. This is such a moral outrage, to be clear, but it's also a violation of international law, and this is where the efforts of the U.S. administration are focused now. It's really quite awful to consider what all of this means in the context of a genocide in Palestine and the suffering of the Yemeni people on the ground.
It's really overwhelming. It's very, very, it's as you say, it's so terrible, so bad. And now there are, the UN agencies. So if we say the International Court of Justice that has made these rulings, and there's the South African case, and the Ireland is a co-plaintiff, I guess, in that case, aren't they? Is that how it works, or is it another term being used?
Ireland has intervened along with a lot of other countries in support of the South African case against the Israeli genocide. In fact, most of the world has come down in one way or another on the side of what the International Court of Justice is doing and on the side of accountability for the Israeli genocide in Palestine. Ireland is just one of them, but the advisory opinions of the International Court of Justice and its provisional measures in the genocide case have effectively been codified a second time by a resolution in the General Assembly.
That's what I was going to ask you about. Yes,
right, which was supported by the vast majority of countries in the world. Only a small group of states opposed it, including obviously Israel, the United States, a couple of far right-wing regimes, and some Pacific Island dependencies of the United States. But virtually the entire world has come down in support of this. Now, on Yemen, it's been a little bit less clear because the Security Council, first it's important to say the Security Council has not authorized the U.S. or its allies to use force against Yemen. And that means that since they're not doing it in self-defense under international law, every bomb they drop is an act of aggression and a violation of international law. But the Security Council has not been as helpful as it could be because the Security Council, as we know, is a politically complicated body, which has proven itself to be largely useless during the genocide in Palestine for that reason. But they've imposed sanctions on Houthi Yemen, and they have criticized the blockade, which I think is incorrect because that means that the Security Council is ignoring the highest rules of international law, those rules that prohibit genocide, that prohibit the unlawful occupation of the territories, that prohibit the acquisition of territory by force, that prohibit aggression, that prohibit all of these things that are being perpetrated in the name of commercial navigation. And that's not how international law works. But even with that sort of muddled approach of the Security Council, they have not authorized the U.S. to use force against Yemen, and therefore that use of force is illegal under international law.
It's also illegal under the Constitution because the president cannot go to war without authorization from Congress, and he doesn't have authorization from Congress either.
That's right. That's right.
And that's one of the things that has also been, some of us have been working towards trying to get war powers resolutions, in a number of places, and especially with respect to Yemen, that there should be a war powers act, and there hasn't been. So there's still
Congress has not authorized the strikes on Yemen under the Biden administration nor under the Trump administration. And both presidents did not go to Congress to seek approval. So they are violating our Constitution as well.
So there are so many ways in which the U.S. is really, the word out of order is not strong enough, is just illegal, is an outlaw, is outside the law, is illegal act, which first of all is nothing new. I mean, all our attack in Afghanistan was illegal. What we did in Iraq was illegal. There's been thing after thing, especially after 9/11, that was used as the excuse for this now forever war. And now everything gets excused because of that, which is ancient history at this point.
Absolutely.
I agree with you that the U.S. has been waging a lot of wars, especially in the Middle East, under the pretense of fighting terrorism. There are a lot more effective and cost-effective ways that they could have dealt with this. And that is, one is to listen to the grievances of the population in the region. The region has been under, U.S. dictating to local leaders what to do. And we know in the case of Yemen, when Yemen, for example, did not support the first Iraq war, Yemen was sanctioned heavily by the U.S. And not just that, a lot of Yemenis who were working in the Gulf countries were deported. And we have about 2 million people overnight who were deported from Saudi Arabia and a lot of Gulf countries. And Yemen's economy, there were so many U.S. and Gulf countries measures to destroy Yemen's economy. So every time a country said no to the U.S. control of the region, those countries get punished. Yet you have dictators like the Saudis or the Emiratis who have been close friends with the U.S. government, despite all the violations of human rights that they commit, not just against their countries, but also overseas. And so, the Saudi-led war in Yemen that started in 2015 under President Obama was supported by the U.S. administration, by Obama, and that war, has not ended. We do have a ceasefire, but that has not ended. Yemen is still under a blockade since
Right.
2015. So you cannot enter anything into Yemen because Yemen is still under a blockade. They moved the bank, for example, the central bank from Sana'a. That resulted in civil servants not being paid since 2016. So they've put in, and a lot of these measures were actually, the US came up with them. And the moving the bank was during the Kuwait negotiation between the Yemeni parties in Kuwait, where the US was dictating the terms of the agreements. The government in Sana'a refused. And they told them, we will move the bank from Sana'a and you will feel, the economic impact of that. So the US has been dictating a lot of the, punishment that Yemen has been experiencing.
And Saudi Arabia and UAE are not really part of that at this point, or?
Right now, they have their own proxies. And so what they're saying is the recent news, the Wall Street Journal just published an article that there are about 80,000 troops that are going to be marching into Hodeidah. So they are planning to start the fight with U.S. support and U.S. bombing to allow them to take Hodeidah and march to Sana'a. So, a war has not ended. At least from the reporting, Saudi Arabia said it's not interested in any ground invasion of Yemen. However, reports saying that the Emiratis are very interested in a ground invasion. But this morning, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the UAE said that it's not interested and that the reports by the Wall Street Journal were not accurate. But I suspect that they are planning a ground invasion with U.S. support in terms of intelligence and bombing, which is, again, Yemen, even today, is considered the largest humanitarian crisis in the world, with 17 million people who are under the poverty line. Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah, I read yesterday there are about 350,000 people in Gaza who are at level 5 of the famine scale.
Right, I said that.
Yeah, and these people, 25% of them are going to die if nothing is gotten into Gaza.
Great.
Yeah, I think that describes it very well. The entire region is in a vice, which has been constructed principally by the United States, with on the one side of the vice, Israel, which the U.S. and its allies use as it's been called an aircraft carrier, basically a touching off point for U.S. imperialism in the region. And then on the other side, its allies with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, who, by the way, have been as responsible as the U.S. for the destruction of Yemen, going back now for decades, and have continued to behave in complicit ways, in spite of some. I don't know if Aisha would agree, but in recent days, there had been some hope that they were backing off and trying to approach, but now, things are getting worrying again, and one can only imagine the pressure. People in the U.S. are not even aware. They'll hear occasional reports on what's happening in the Middle East. They don't. Not everyone in this country realizes that the genocide in Palestine could not take place for a week without the U.S. support. The U.S. provides the money, it provides the weapons, it provides the intelligence, it provides the diplomatic cover, it provides the use of the veto, it provides the propaganda podiums, all in support of the genocide in Palestine. It's a genocide that's paid for with U.S. tax dollars. In the meantime, they're also not aware that the U.S. occupies, with a massive number of troops, large amounts of Syrian territory next door, unlawfully, I would add, that it still has hundreds of troops in Iraq at the same time, that it is the principal force which is attacking Yemen today, as we've been discussing, and that it has been agitating for war with Iran going back for many years now and reaching, I think, very dangerous levels today, largely, I should say, at the behest of Israel, which has been trying to get the U.S. to engage in a military conflict with Iran going back for many, many years. And so, and if you look at the rest of the region, what you see is that every government in the region has been either corrupted, captured, and co-opted by the U.S., so that the various regimes in the region, one by one, have become client states of the United States, or those that refused to bow down were utterly destroyed, as was the case of Syria, as was the case of Libya, and as they are now threatening with Iran. The exception of 50% of Lebanon, which the U.S. has been unable to get to bend the knee, and 50% of Yemen, which the U.S. has been unable to get to bend the knee, and of course Iran. It is a colonized region. I don't think there's any other way to put it, under the control of the U.S. And for what reason? In defense of Israel, which is to say an oppressive foreign regime that exists as a rogue state in the international system, and of course with concern for oil, for the oil in the region. Right. It is an immoral campaign of control that has led to nothing but violence and bloodshed and suffering going back now for decades.
So if we are to think about the international law aspects a little bit more, and especially about now there's the two world courts, right? There's the World Court, the International Court of Justice. So why don't you sort of walk us through where the court cases are right now in terms of the parties and the decisions and what they're requiring of the various countries?
Well, in the case of the genocide in Palestine, this is one of very few bright spots that we have seen over the course of the last year or so, because Israel had benefited from, for its entire existence of some 80 years, of a wall of impunity. Right. And so-called Israel exception that had been built up by the UK and the United States and the broader West that somehow put Israel above international law. As a result of that, Israel has been able to perpetrate all sorts of mass atrocities and never to face any accountability for that. What's happened during this current round of genocide in Palestine is that wall of impunity has begun to crumble. And we now have, this is just a fact, that today Israel is on trial for genocide in the International Court of Justice. The court has issued a series of provisional measures, not just binding Israel, but all states in the world, that they have to take steps in order to stop Israel from perpetrating these crimes. Very few have done so, and I'll say something about that as well. In another case, in so-called advisory opinions, the International Court of Justice has also ruled that the entire occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, including East Jerusalem, is entirely unlawful and it must end completely and quickly. They have ruled that Israel is guilty of perpetrating a system of apartheid and racial segregation. They have ruled that all states are obliged to cut off all the economic and trade and other relations that enable Israel to continue with these international violations. And they are now have a case before them that is looking at Israel's obligations in the occupied territories to international organizations like the UN, which Israel has been attacking and murdering UN staff in record numbers over the course of the last year and a half. In addition, you've got a separate court, which is called the International Criminal Court. International Criminal Court deals with individual criminal responsibility. And the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Israel's leaders, beginning with the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the former Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant. They are wanted fugitives that are prevented from traveling to most states in the world. Of course, we have a problem here that some Western states in particular are indicating that they will not meet their legal obligations because, in their view, international law applies to the global South. It doesn't apply to white people, if I could put it in those terms. It doesn't apply to people in Europe, and it doesn't apply to Israelis. That, of course, has no legal bearing whatsoever. And just today, the International Criminal Court initiated proceedings against Hungary, because Hungary, which was a party to the International Criminal Court, had a visit from Benjamin Netanyahu a week or so ago. The court sent the request to the government of Hungary to arrest Netanyahu. The Hungarian government refused to do so, and instead they said, we are withdrawing from the court. But withdrawal legally is not immediate. So they still had an obligation to arrest Netanyahu. They didn't do so. And so now the International Criminal Court has begun proceedings against Hungary for failing to do so. Now, we know, of course, that our own government is a rogue government. It does not respect international law. And it welcomed, just days ago, Benjamin Netanyahu to Washington again and gave him a VIP welcome. Remember, a wanted fugitive from justice who's wanted by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity, including extermination. And he was had the red carpet rolled out for him by the U.S. government, which has even gone further in attacking the International Criminal Court and threatening it and applying sanctions to it for daring to do its job under the Rome Statute to hold Israeli perpetrators to account. That's where we are legally. I say it's a bright spot because it does show that there is a willingness on the part of international judicial mechanisms to begin to hold accountable perpetrators from the West, including the Israeli regime. But we are up against a very difficult wall of resistance from the U.S. government and from a few other complicit Western governments.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, Vicky, which is an excellent summary, is also Lindsey Graham said, if we allow them to, put the Israeli government and the Israeli soldiers on trial, then they will come after us, which is a very interesting statement because only a guilty person will say that. So the U.S.
I'm sorry, say it again. They will say what?
The only a guilty person will say if they go after Israel, they will come after us. If we allow them to go after Israel, they will come after the U.S. So why would he need to say that? He says that because he knows the U.S. had committed similar crimes.
Right. Oh, absolutely. So, yes. Thank you for bringing that. Mm-hmm.
Well, and all of these things that I'm talking about in terms of international decisions, they don't just impose obligations on the part of Israel to stop what it's doing. They impose also obligations on all other states.
Right.
To see that that's happening. And this is where Yemen comes in, because there are 193 countries in the world. Some of them, when this genocide was raging, some of them, like the US, the UK, Germany, some other Western states, they actually joined Israel in actively perpetrating the genocide. That was their response to the genocide. They joined in. Others, mostly Western states again, they chose to be complicit in the genocide by supplying the Israeli regime with fuel and spare parts and diplomatic cover and other necessities to continue it. Then you had a large number of states from all regions who simply remained silent and passive, which is also a breach of their international legal obligations, because under international law, states have affirmative obligations when it comes to things like genocide or even war crimes, that they have to act to enforce those things. Then you have a fourth group of states who have, yes, they have actively opposed the Israeli regime in public statements and diplomatic action in the Security Council. They voted in the GA in the right ways. They've joined cases against Israel in the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, but they've done nothing to cut off material support to the regime or to actively defend the Palestinians from the genocide. And then you have the smallest group of all. And these are countries that have done what international law requires. They have taken concrete steps to actively meet their obligations under international law to try to stop the genocide. The two most obvious ones are South Africa, which has brought Israel to trial for genocide in the World Court, and, as we're talking about now, very significantly, Yemen.
Right.
Yemen has actually imposed this blockade to stop shipping from resupplying the Israeli regime. And it has been effective because it was so effective, they bankrupted the port of Eilat, Israel's port on the Red Sea, completely shut it down and bankrupted it. So it was actually working. And that's why the US, which cannot tolerate any opposition to its genocide in Palestine, I say its genocide because it is a co-perpetrator, that's why they are bombing Yemen.
What a terrible picture. What a terrible picture it paints. I think about some of the work that, the Code Pink World Court campaign that has done some work on trying to get, I was privileged to help a little bit along the sidelines of some of those efforts to meet with different countries and try to get them to sign on or to do the Uniting for Peace resolution to try and get around the Security Council, for the General Assembly to get around the Security Council. And I think one of the only ones that we found was that there was, tell me if I'm right, that it didn't Colombia stop supplying coal or something like that, that they had been, or they had been supplying maybe that they were making some supplies. They had stopped supplying Israel.
Yeah, a number of countries have cut off supplies to Israel in recent.
And so, who would they be? That was Colombia one of them?
I don't
Colombia was one.
Yeah, was Colombia?
Yeah, Colombia was one.
I thought, yeah. And there were a couple of them. So they would be sort of maybe a little sub partial group to the resistance, to the effort to at least do something to interfere or at least stop.
Yeah, but even the UK for a brief period of time stopped shipping certain parts, military parts, as they were required to do. But it was meaningless. The thing is, what's different about what Yemen has done is they've actually materially taken action that stops it. Cutting off some supplies, but maintaining diplomatic relations. Still allowing your ports, and I should have mentioned this as well. There's another initiative, which is the Hague Group. The Hague Group of states are 9 states that have come together and have committed to specific actions to meet their obligations in opposing the genocide, as the International Court of Justice has ruled, including not allowing any shipping or anything to use their ports. That ultimately being used to research. So basically, it's what the Yemenis are doing, what the Houthis are doing, is expanded now to 9 countries around the world in the Hague Group, which is doing outreach to try to grow its numbers, simply to do what they are legally obliged to do, as has been clarified by the International Court of Justice. So they're in that category increasingly. But mere declarations or a partial cutoff of some things to the Israeli regime is not adequate for meeting your obligations. It has to be complete in all of the power that you have. But some of these states, they've taken multiple actions. So they cut off some supplies. They vote the right way in the General Assembly. If they're in the Security Council, they vote the right way. But we are very far away from where we need to go. The General Assembly of the United Nations has done some very important things, but it hasn't used all of its powers. And that's the duty of these states as well, to convene under the Uniting for Peace resolution in an emergency special session of the General Assembly to take concrete measures for the protection of peace and security, including economic embargoes, military embargoes, trade, all those sorts, which they can't enforce, but they can adopt them, and then they can all agree that they are individually and collectively going to enforce them. They haven't reestablished the anti-apartheid mechanisms that existed during apartheid in South Africa. They have the power to do so. They could convene a protection force, which certainly could be deployed to the surrounding countries, but in principle, legally, could also be deployed into the West Bank and Gaza Strip, because Israel has no sovereignty over those territories. And you may say, well, the Israelis are never going to allow them in, but at least they have to try. They have to ratchet up the pressure, get them into the region, equip them with monitoring technologies that are effective. They should be armed. to defend themselves, but also to defend civilians. There's a lot of things that the so-called international community could do and must do in the face of a genocide, but is not yet done. And that is also a duty of individual member states, not just to cut off, one thing going to the regime, but to mobilize in order to stop this thing.
And I want to hear, Vicky, the Yemeni people and the government in Sana'a, when they took this stance, they know exactly what the consequences are.
Right.
These are people who've been, bombed for 8 years straight, every single day for 8 years. They've been starved. So they know that what's going to happen to them. Yeah. And yet they decided to do what they are doing. And during the war in Yemen and during the blockade in Yemen, they never closed the Red Sea to any ships, not to Saudi ships, not Emirati, not American. And when they were under siege, when they're under a blockade, they only use this to stop a genocide. So they know what they're doing. It's not something that they take lightly. They know what the consequences are. They've experienced the consequences before. So, a lot of people would say, oh, they don't know what's going to happen. No, they know.
No.
And this war, this bombing by the U.S., many people have expected it, and it feels different than the war that was imposed on them without their decision by the Saudi, UAE, and Obama, and that started in 2015. So this time, the senses in Yemen is that we know what we're doing and we stand by our decision, no matter the consequences. Versus when the war started in 2015 that continued for 8 years, that was unprovoked. Nobody wanted it. It just, overnight the Saudi decided to do it. So there is a very, very strong sense of pride in Yemen.
Sure.
In the average person, in the average street, that I support this, despite the consequences.
Well, and that is why actually in this, first of all, Craig, you wrote an article on just that point and everything you've said, but that both of you have said during this program is supporting that very point, that they are taking a principled stand, that they are acting under their obligations under international law, which other countries are not doing. And even South Africa bringing the case has brought them under some scrutiny, but it hasn't, they aren't getting actively bombed right now for it. Not that they should be. But the one other thing I wanted to bring out too, before we go into also how people can get more involved in things, is merchants of death. So when I think about bombing and I think about, all the money, the billions and billions, as you said, this being spent, that could be spent for people all over the world, people in the United States, other people, for the planet, for people's needs. And instead that money is going to the merchants of death or the arms manufacturers. And the thing about arms is you can't sell more when you don't use what you already have. So they have to have the wars to have the, to get rid of their inventory so they can sell more inventory. And I know that, Aisha, you were featured in the Merchants of Death that Kathy Kelly and other wonderful activists put together. And there've been, indictments or efforts told to the biggest war weapons weapons manufacturers, about the illegal acts, about the fact that the U.S. is breaking its own laws, breaking international law by being the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, our own government.
Yeah, that reminded me of an article that was written in which Lockheed Martin CEO had to meet with his investors when the ceasefire in Yemen occurred, to tell them not to worry. There will be plenty of wars in the Middle East. I just, to this day, I cannot understand how telling his investors, don't worry about this ceasefire, we're going to have more death and destruction in the region, and that his investors would be happy with that.
Yeah.
Yes, they are the merchants of death, for sure.
Clear, in the Middle East is the testing ground. So the Middle East plays two roles for these merchants of death. One is it is this constant production and consumption of public money, which is flowing into these companies, and they need an excuse, and so they keep provoking these wars and bombing the people of the Middle East because the people of the Middle East are not human. They are dehumanized in Western media so much that people hear about bombs dropping on Arab countries, and the reaction is, what's for dinner in this country? The second thing is that they literally use the bodies of the people in the Middle East as testing grounds for new weapon systems. And so Israel, for example, brags publicly that the weapons that it sells, because while it's getting all these weapons from us, it also produces weapons. The weapons it sells are, quote, battlefield tested. And by battlefield tested, they mean dropped on children in schools and hospitals and homes and refugee camps and tents and water supplies. And, that's where they battlefield test their new horrific weapons that are, in any event, underwritten by the U.S. and the broader West. So it really is about merchants of death. I want to say one more thing before we move on completely, because you mentioned the principle of the Yemenis in all of this. The Yemenis also proved that they were acting in principle, because the day that the ceasefire started in January, the ceasefire in Gaza, they stopped the blockade completely.
Right.
They withdrew and they stopped, and they only started it again when Israel resumed its siege of Gaza and its full-blown genocide. So they are literally linking this. All of this is a sacrifice that they are making with a great deal of enthusiasm from their own people in order to oppose a genocide being perpetrated on another people. And this is another reason why it's so scary for the US government. Because what you're seeing from the people in Yemen is exactly what's being felt by the people across the region. Their governments are corrupted and co-opted, but the people are not. They are feeling the solidarity with the Palestinian people under Israeli and American bombs. And all of a sudden you have, someone who's in control of, the capital of Sana'a and of the armed forces and of the Bab al-Mandeb, in the Strait. That is actually doing what the people believe in. And that's very scary for imperialists. That's very scary for the Israeli-American project in the Middle East, which is all we have to do is control the governments, and then we don't have to worry about the people of the region. And that's why they're coming down, I think, so hard on what is happening in Yemen. There cannot be any resistance in their minds.
Well, you're making me think of a lot of things that are going on around here, because we have some resistance, but it all pales under the view of what the Yemeni people are doing. So before we run out of time, I just want us to go around again on, what's your best recommendation for how people can learn more and get more involved. And before I turn it over, I want to say, first of all, just being on this show, because so many people do not know. This is why it's so important to get the actual facts out there, the principles and the facts of what is going on and that's so important. And you both do that in every arena. This is just one of them. So we're blessed to have you on this show for that. And then the other thing I want to say, of course, that I want to mention the Yemeni Relief and Reconstruction Foundation, which I know you worked so hard and is such a deeply needed and deeply committed group doing so much there. So let's talk about what can people do? How can people help?
I think people need to learn more. I think they need to get more information. For Yemen, we have two organizations that put in a lot of information. One is Hands of Yemen, and one is Yemeni Alliance, Yemeni American Alliance. So I think if people can learn about what's going on in Yemen, unfortunately, a lot of the social media accounts that speak up about Yemen had been silenced or removed from social media, whether X or Instagram or even Facebook. For example, because I post a lot about Palestine, the Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation that I founded, and we're all volunteer in it. We're not able to do any ads on Facebook, on Instagram. They have restricted us because my personal account talks about Palestine.
Have you gone to Threads or Blue Sky yet, or not yet?
I've gone to a lot of different places, and we have accounts everywhere. But if people want to know about what we're doing in Yemen, please visit our website, yemenfoundation.org. You'll see what we're doing. As I said, it's an all volunteer organization, both here and in Yemen.
Thank you so much, Aisha.
Thank you.
And Craig?
I mean, so much. I think starting with Aisha said, donate, support kinds of organizations that are doing the work if you are in a position to do so. But everybody can do some things. You can turn off corporate media and support independent media where the truth is being told, and then share that truth. You can organize. There are plenty of groups that you can join, or start your own group, because the biggest tool that we have in this struggle is solidarity, and the forces aligned against us are overwhelming, but we won't be overwhelmed if we are organized as well. So start a group or join a group. Boycott, divest, and sanction. We are feeding these evils with everything that we do, unless we are actively involved in boycott, divest, and sanction. Protest. It's not just empowering for us when we participate in the protest, but it helps to get a message out across a curtain of propaganda that will make people ask, what is this really all about? Maybe we should learn. So participate in protest. Educate yourself and educate other people. There are tons of resources out there on these issues. Check in with our social media. You'll see some sources there that you can reach. I say prosecute, meaning lawyers out there and others, we have to use the court system to hold individuals to account for complicity in these crimes in our own country, as well as in international tribunals. And even if you can't get a prosecutor to go along, there are civil cases that can be brought that can make it more difficult for companies and individuals to be participating in all of this. If you are a privileged person who is not likely to be deported or otherwise vulnerable, civil disobedience is always a moral choice. And it's made a difference in struggles for going back for forever. And I'd say also wear symbols of solidarity. So whenever they try to silence us, get yourself a big slice of watermelon like Vicky is wearing on her sweater right now. Wear a keffiyeh. Wear T-shirts that are appropriately messaged. Why? Because they're telling us not to.
Right.
So every time anyone tells you to lower your voice, raise your voice. When they tell you to be silent, speak up. If they tell you not to wear these symbols of solidarity, wear more of them, more visible of them. We are safe in numbers. This is all a part of solidarity, and those symbols can mean something. All of these things together will not immediately stop the genocide or the bombing of the Yemeni people, but they are a part of a movement that is growing, and that has grown more in the last year and a half than in my entire lifetime. We have to keep building that movement. We have to keep pushing back, and we have to stay strong and in support of each other. Solidarity, I think, is the answer.
Well, we are doing that. Thank you for such a great comprehensive list of things. I'm going to send people to the Western New York Peace Center, WNYPeace.org, to our community calendar, because there's a lot of exciting things, including a peacekeepers training, which is really de-escalation and nonviolent direct action training that we're giving on May 3rd. We just trained 55 peacekeepers for our recent hands-off that was Buffalo United. We had 10,000 people in the street. And we also are showing the movie A Force More Powerful. So join us at Burning Books on April 23rd and 29th, and we'll be showing part 1 and part 2 of that movie, plus with discussion. But the other thing, you can watch it yourself at home. Just go DuckDuckGo to A Force More Powerful, and it's all about just what you're talking about, that strength, people power, the people power that we have that we can use to make real change. And I just keep thinking crisis equal to opportunity, and that the more things are sort of breaking up in ways that are terrible and really scary, the more we might get further than we ever got before towards really having a true democracy and a real world of peace and justice where we can care for people on the planet. And I want to say this is stellar media to have both of you on. And I just can't thank you enough. So grateful. And this, I just thank you again and again. And we'll look forward to the next time. And in the meanwhile, this is Talking Peace. And together we've been talking peace in truth and love. Thank you so much.